My wife confessed our 3-year-old daughter isn't mine. She was her work affairs. My family called me a monster for abandoning them, but I lost 4 years living a lie. Now I'm starting over in another town, and they'll never see me again. I'm 33 years old. I work in financial consulting, and I need to tell this story because what happened 6 months ago basically destroyed the life I thought I had. Well, the life I thought I had, because it turns out everything was one giant lie, and I was the only idiot who didn't know it. I guess I should start from the beginning, or at least from where everything still made sense. I met Victoria when I was like 26. She was 23, at one of those boring corporate parties where nobody really wants to be, but everyone goes because the boss is there. She worked in marketing for another company, and I don't know. There was something about her that attracted me from the first moment. It wasn't just that she was pretty, which she was, but she had this energy, you know? Like she lit up any room she was in. We started dating, things moved fast, and 2 years later, we were already married. My family adored her, especially my mom, Nancy, and my sister Hannah, who basically treated her like she was their best friend or something. Everything seemed perfect, like too perfect looking back on it. When Victoria got pregnant, I was 29, and honestly, it was one of the happiest moments of my life. I remember we were in the kitchen of our apartment. It was a Sunday morning, and she showed me the pregnancy test with this huge smile. I picked her up and started spinning around with her, both of us laughing like crazy. My mom cried when we told her. My sister was already planning the baby shower before we even knew the baby's sex. 9 months later, Charlotte was born, and, honestly, I felt like my life was complete. She was this perfect little girl with big eyes and chubby cheeks, and I swear every time she looked at me, I felt like my chest was going to explode with love. The first 3 years were normal, I guess. I mean, we had the typical problems of any couple with a small baby, you know, sleepless nights, arguments about whose turn it was to change the diaper, the stress of work and parenting at the same time, but nothing that made me think something was wrong. Nothing that made me suspect what was really going on. Victoria was a good mother. I can't deny that. She'd stay up with Charlotte when she had nightmares, made her breakfast every morning in the shape of smiley faces, all that stuff good mothers are supposed to do. And I was happy being a dad, taking her to the park on Saturdays, teaching her to count, playing with her on the living room floor, while Victoria made dinner. But then came that day, 6 months ago. It was a Tuesday. I remember it perfectly because on Tuesdays I normally came home late from work because of some client meetings. But that particular Tuesday the meeting got canceled, and I came home early, like 6 in the evening instead of the usual 9. Victoria was in the living room with Charlotte watching some princess movie or whatever, and when she saw me walk in, she went pale. Literally pale, like she'd seen a ghost. I asked her if she was okay, and she just said she needed to talk to me, that it was important. I put Charlotte to bed, gave her favorite cartoons on the iPad. Yeah, I know it's not ideal, but I needed her distracted, and went back to the living room. Victoria was sitting on the couch with her hands between her legs, staring at the floor, and she wouldn't look me in the eyes. I sat down in front of her on the coffee table because something about her body language was making me nervous, you know? That feeling in your stomach when you know something really bad is about to happen, but you don't know what yet. And then she started talking. She told me she had to tell me something, that she'd made a mistake years ago, that she was so sorry. I thought maybe she'd overspent money or something. I don't know. My brain still couldn't process what was really coming. But then she said, 4 years ago, I had an affair. It lasted like 3 months, and I got pregnant. And that's when my world literally stopped. I just stared at her, unable to say anything, like my brain just wasn't processing the words. She kept talking, tears running down her face, saying it had been with a guy from work named Ethan, that when he found out about the pregnancy, he told her he didn't want anything to do with it, and basically disappeared. That she panicked and decided not to tell me anything because she was afraid of losing me. She said that when Charlotte was born, she already knew she probably wasn't mine because the dates didn't add up. But she had hoped, prayed that she would be. That over time she'd convinced herself that maybe there was a chance. But 2 months ago, she said, she'd secretly gotten a paternity test done because the guilt was killing her, and it confirmed what she already knew, that Charlotte wasn't biologically mine. I don't remember exactly what happened next, I think I stood up, or maybe I stayed sitting. I don't know. What I do remember is feeling like someone had reached their hand into my chest and ripped out my heart. That literally, 3 years. 3 fucking years, living a lie. 3 years being dad to a girl who wasn't even mine, while Victoria looked me in the face every single day knowing the truth. I asked her why she was telling me now, and she said she couldn't keep living with the lie, that she loved me and needed to be honest with me. And I just thought, you love me? Did you really just say you love me after lying to me for 4 years about something so fundamental? I left the house that same night. I threw clothes in a suitcase, while Victoria followed me around the bedroom, begging me to sit down and talk, to think about Charlotte, that I couldn't just leave like that. But I couldn't be there. I couldn't even look at her without feeling like I was going to throw up. Charlotte asked me where I was going, and I didn't know what to tell her. I just hugged her and told her Daddy had to go on a work trip, that I'd see her soon. She was 3 years old. How do you explain something like that to a 3-year-old? Though I wasn't even sure anymore if I had the right to call myself her dad. I ended up at a hotel near downtown, one of those generic hotels where everything smells like cleaning products and the sheets are rough. I blocked Victoria's number because she was calling me every 5 minutes. Text messages, voicemails, everything. I couldn't listen to her. Not yet. Maybe never. That first night, I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every moment of the last 3 years, wondering what had been real and what had been part of the lie. Every time Charlotte had called me Daddy, every time I'd read her a bedtime story, every time I'd planned her future in my head, it was all contaminated now with this horrible truth. The next day I called my best friend Alexander. He and I have known each other since college. He's one of those people who's always there no matter what. I told him everything, and there was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then he just said, "Come to my house. Stay as long as you need." I also contacted a lawyer, M.S. Powell, who'd been recommended to me. I explained the situation and she was direct, told me I needed proof of the infidelity and that the paternity issue was going to complicate things, but it was manageable. I requested a month off from work, made up some excuse about family problems, which was technically true, though not in the way they thought. My mom called me like 3 days later. Victoria had told her everything, obviously, and I expected my family to support me, to understand why I couldn't stay with someone who'd lied to me so blatantly. But my mom basically told me I was overreacting, that Victoria had made a mistake, but she was still my wife and my daughter's mother, that I had to think about Charlotte and how this was going to affect her. And I told her, "Mom, Charlotte isn't even my biological daughter. Don't you understand? That?" And she said that didn't matter, that I'd raised her for 3 years, and that made me her father anyway, that I couldn't just abandon her for something that wasn't her fault. My sister Hannah called later with the same speech, that I was being selfish, that I had to forgive Victoria, that we all make mistakes. I told them both that they needed to respect my decision, but they kept insisting. My mom got to the point of telling me that if I divorced Victoria, she'd disown me as her son, that she wasn't going to support me destroying my family over hurt pride. Hurt pride. Like this was just about my ego and not about 4 years of lies and betrayal. I hung up the phone and didn't answer their calls again for weeks. I moved to Alexander's place after the second week at the hotel. He lived alone in a 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of the city and offered me the guest room without thinking twice. It was weird at first because I was used to having my own family, my own routine, and suddenly, I was living like when I was in my 20s again. But Alexander was incredible, honestly. He didn't pressure me to talk if I didn't want to, but he was there when I needed to vent, which was more often than I'd like to admit. Miss Powell moved forward with the divorce papers, and when Victoria received them, let's just say things got worse. My mom called me furious, yelling at me about how dare I do this to Victoria, that she was devastated, that Charlotte cried for me every night asking where Daddy was, and that hurt, I'm not going to lie. Thinking about Charlotte confused and sad broke my heart, but I also knew that staying in that situation was only going to be worse for everyone in the long run. Hannah also started her guilt campaign, sending me daily messages about how I was being cruel, how Victoria was suffering, how I was the only one who could fix this. I asked Victoria to meet me at a neutral cafe because I needed answers. Not the generic answers she'd given me that night, but the real truth about why she'd done it. We met on a Saturday afternoon at a downtown Starbucks. She showed up with red, swollen eyes, clearly not sleeping well. We sat at a table in the back and I went straight to the point. I asked her why she'd had the affair, what was missing in our marriage that had led her to sleep with another guy. She started with vague excuses. That she'd felt lonely, that I worked a lot, that Ethan paid attention to her in a way I supposedly didn't. And I just sat there thinking, really? That's your justification? I asked her why she'd waited 3 years to tell me the truth, and she said that at first she'd panicked, that she didn't know how to tell me. That as time passed, it got harder and harder, because every day that went by meant one more lie. She said she loved me, that she never stopped loving me, that the affair with Ethan hadn't meant anything. And I just thought, how can you say you love me when you've been lying to my face every single day for years? How can you say it didn't mean anything when you got pregnant by him and decided to make me believe she was my daughter? I asked her if she'd ever tried to contact Ethan after Charlotte was born, if he knew he had a biological daughter. Victoria said no, that he'd made it very clear he didn't want anything to do with the baby and she'd respected that. That in her mind, if I never found out, then we could all be happy. That Charlotte would have a father who loved her, and that's what mattered. And that's when I understood that Victoria really didn't see what she'd done wrong, or at least not in its full magnitude. For her, this was just a mistake she'd made and had tried to fix in the best way she could think of. She didn't understand that she'd built our entire life on a fundamental lie. I got up from the table after like half an hour. There was nothing more to talk about, no explanation that would make this better or more understandable. Victoria grabbed my arm and begged me to reconsider, to think about Charlotte, that she'd do anything to make up for this. But I just pulled away and left. I walked around downtown for hours after that, aimlessly, just processing everything. People passed by me laughing, talking on the phone, holding hands, and I wondered how many of those people were also living lies without knowing it. Miss Powell moved ahead with the divorce, and I made it clear that I didn't want custody of Charlotte. I know that sounds horrible, and believe me, it was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but how could I keep being her father knowing what I knew? Every time I saw her, it would be a reminder of the betrayal, of the years I lost being deceived. It wasn't fair to her or to me. My family, of course, crucified me for this. My mom told me I was a monster. How could I abandon a child who'd considered me her father for 3 years? Hannah stopped talking to me directly and started sending me passive-aggressive messages about responsibility and maturity. It got to a point where I simply cut off communication with my mom and my sister. I blocked their numbers, their social media, everything. I couldn't keep hearing how I was the villain in this story when I'd been the victim from the beginning. Alexander supported me in that decision, told me that sometimes you have to distance yourself from toxic people even if they're family, that my mental health was more important than maintaining relationships that were only hurting me. I went back to work after the month off. It was weird at first because obviously my colleagues knew something had happened, but nobody asked directly. I focused on my projects, on client meetings, on keeping myself busy so I wouldn't think too much. Nights were the worst. When I was alone in Alexander's guest room and my mind would start wandering, I'd think about Charlotte, whether she missed me, how Victoria had explained my absence to her. I'd think about all the moments we'd shared, and how they were now stained by the truth. The divorce was finalized like 4 months after Victoria received the papers. It wasn't a complicated process legally, because I basically gave her everything. The house, the shared savings. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted to get out of it as quickly as possible. Victoria tried to call me the day the final papers were signed, but I didn't answer. There was nothing more to say. There was no magical closure that was going to make this better. I decided to move out of the city after that. There were too many memories on every corner, every restaurant, every park where I'd taken Charlotte. I thanked Alexander for everything he'd done for me and packed my things. I moved to a smaller town like 2 hours away, got a remote job that let me stay in the same industry, but without having to be in an office full of people who knew my story. I rented a small apartment, basic, nothing fancy but enough to start over. The first few months in the town were lonely. I'm not going to lie. I didn't know anyone. I had no established routines. I basically just worked and existed. But slowly I started finding things I liked. I joined a local gym, started hiking on weekends, met some neighbors who were friendly. They weren't deep friendships yet, but it was something. It was a start. Alexander came to visit me every month or two. We'd have some beers and talk about everything except Victoria and Charlotte, which was exactly what I needed. Now, 6 months after everything exploded, I'm in a different place. I wouldn't say I'm okay, because honestly, there are still days where I wake up and the first thing I think about is everything I lost. But I'm also not in that dark hole where I was at the beginning. I've learned to live with this, I guess, to accept that some things just don't make sense and never will. I haven't talked to Victoria again, or to my mom, or Hannah. I don't know if Charlotte still asks about me, or if Victoria has. Explain the truth to her in some age-appropriate way. Part of me wants to know, but a bigger part knows it's better this way. That stirring all that up again is only going to reopen wounds that are just starting to heal. The other day I was walking through downtown and I saw a father with his little daughter. She was like 4 years old maybe, and he was carrying her on his shoulders while she laughed. I had to look away because I felt my throat closing up. It still hurts, you know? It probably always will hurt a little. But I'm learning to live with that pain instead of letting it consume me. I'm rebuilding my life piece by piece, discovering who I am outside of being a husband and father, creating a new identity that isn't based on lies. And I guess that's enough for now.